Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Coates, your host of the Live Free and Diet Hard podcast. Welcome to episode 311 Lifetime. And Christian Thibaudeau has been a previous guest. It's great to have you back. If you guys aren't familiar with Christian, I can't help you. I'm sorry. He's an iconic Canadian strength coach, educator, writer, author. He's been very prolific for a long time, really the flagship of T Nation for a very long time. And it's great to have you back, my friend.
It's great to be back. I mean, I always enjoy our time together, and I feel kind of bad, like not responding to your messages. So I said, well, I at least like owe him to be there for the podcast. So
Well, as you said, right, if you don't jump on it immediately, you're so in your work and focus.
absolutely, yeah.
But so you and I will finally get to meet this year because we've had some near misses, but we'll both be presenting at canfitpro's global conference and trade show. So I will be releasing this right after recording. So anybody who listens to it right away, if you're interested in coming to see us both in Toronto, August 9th and 10th, CanFit still has early bird pricing until the end of May. So you'll have a couple of days from hearing this. Okay. But also, and I'm happy to see you guys there, but I also would love for you guys to come to my event. This is why I got Christian back. The Evolve Strength Business and Coaching Conference that I partner with, the gym that I contract out of Evolve Strength. And Christian, you're part of my lineup for that as well, and that is September 13th and 14th. So we were hoping to have you last year, but Swiss was so close to it, and it's
And
so
I was, to
hard.
be honest, I actually had to cancel Swiss
Shit.
too because I was super sick. I was in
Oh,
France the week before, and ulcer flared out. Ironically, exactly the same thing that happened to Mike Tyson. So as soon as I got out of the plane, man, I was just throwing up like crazy. I just couldn't make it to the hotel room. Yeah. And I just like got the fear of flying in me for a few
oh,
months.
oh. Fair enough. And I mean, with these type of events, we can plan around speakers. I mean, last year with our plans, we had at three different junctures, three different speakers had to drop out. Now, all three speakers gave me like months of notice. So it worked out fine. Dr. Gabrielle Lyon was originally in our lineup, but our book release timing was just so tight that it didn't work out. But it worked out great because I was able to get some really amazing people in place of that. So, it all works out in the end. There's so many great people who would love to be part of these events. So, but anyway, we will get to hang out in person. I can't wait. And but so you've been doing this a long time. And given that time frame, there's a few things I want to talk about, like what you've seen has changed, but what are you currently passionate about and excited about this deep into your career, especially that you're enjoying educating about or just talking about?
I actually got back to coaching quite a bit. I mean, I was focusing on exclusively education for about 4 years span. And the problem with that is because of COVID and all that stuff, people kind of change their habits of traveling and stuff. So they will travel for big events like the one you're organizing, but very few people go to individual seminars anymore. It's a very tough market. So I actually changed my business model to include more webinars and stuff like that, which is doing great. But now I had more free time than ever. So yes, it's good for creation, but not great for a relationship and feeling useful in life. So I got back to coaching people in the gym. That's what I love. And anyway, it's kind of intellectually dishonest, like to teach other people to be a great coach if you're not training people anymore, right? Because yeah, you've trained people decades ago and you had success, but you know what? Methods changes, people change, behavioral change because different psychological traits, the new generation, so on and so forth. So what was true from a coaching perspective 10 years ago doesn't hold true anymore. And even from a training methods, for hypertrophy, for strength, for body condition, whatever, there is constantly new information. And how do you integrate these new information into your teachings if you don't experiment with them, if you don't apply them in the field, right? And sure, you can do that somewhat with online coaching, but it's not the same, man. You need to work with people. And I strongly believe that even if your business is mostly online coaching, I do lots of online coaching, you still need to coach people in person. And it did change my personal effectiveness as an online coach as well as a presenter, because now I have more stories, I have more up to date. I mean, it's like when Charles Poliquin was presenting, I mean, his stories were cool, but like he was talking about players that nobody knew existed because it was like 30 years ago. So when it's up to date, it's new clients and stuff like that, it's always better. And ironically, it's more general population clients, because all the best clients I've ever had, and I've trained athletes in 28 different sports, all the best clients, the most fun clients I had were general people, just regular folks. Like I always give the example of people ask me, what was my favorite client, my most impressive client? And people always expect it to be a pro football player, pro baseball player, pro hockey player. It was a business owner, father of 6. He was like 44, never trained a day in his life. His wife bought him a package. And from the first day he was in the gym, you just know there's no way he wanted to be there, right? He was very reluctantly coming to train. And when I first assessed him, he was barely bench pressing 75 pounds. Well, after a year, he was bench pressing 315. He was doing the iron cross on rings, and he probably had the biggest arms in the gym. It's crazy. The guy got so into training, and the results are nice, but it's the change in behavior. Okay. He got so into training. I remember one morning we were set to have a big snowstorm. So I texted him because normally he trains in the morning at 7 a.m. I said, well, we won't be training tomorrow because you're going to have like 30 centimeters of snow. Say, hang on, I'm going to come pick you up. What I didn't know is that he had a side hustle. He was plowing snow. He had a big truck, and he came with me with a snowplow, and we went to the gym at 6 a.m. in the morning, and he brought me back afterwards. So just a behavioral change, the making training a habit for him, that was a big victory.
There's so much good stuff in here. I remember I swear it was probably around 2017, give or take a year. And I saw a lot of the established coaches that were moving over into the business coaching space, and they were moving very much online, getting away from in person, but also moving away from even coaching people online. And I noticed after a few years, those people started trickling back to hybrid. They were doing a mix of coaching trainers, educating, and then they were going back to coaching human beings again. And I mean, part of it, I think, is business coaching is not for everybody, but also I agree with you. I think that the best way that you could be a great educator in the space is to stay on top of the coaching skill. And a lot of our contemporaries, a lot of like friends, even industry leaders, you look at a guy like Lee Boyce. Lee and I are very great friends, and Lee still loves coaching full-time in person, despite the fact that he works as an adjunct professor at times. Luca still at his gym, 20 to 25 hours of coaching on the floor. He eats, sleeps, and breathes it. And I do believe in it. And I think this could also be a narrative. It absolutely can be a post-rationalization to support the fact that we do it. But quite frankly, I also think that it's for trainers, it's very economically sound. It's a great way to have a more stable livelihood, which is part of this equation too. And not everybody's going to be. My last guest on the podcast was Vince Del Monte. Most of you guys are never going to become Vince Del Monte, where you scale something on the business coaching side to where you just don't have to coach people in person anymore.
And even those who do make it big, it doesn't last forever. So, I mean, it's like I always use the example of pro hockey players that make millions yet go bankrupt. And we've seen plenty of those because there's the lifestyle that come with it. So same thing when you're a trainer, you might have and that's the thing with social media. You can be a very, very quick success in coaching. You can make a lot of money rapidly without much effort if you're lucky, if you brand yourself properly. But it also can come down really fast, really, really fast. First, the algorithm will change. The people's choices will change. A new, more trendy person will come in. So if you have a more diversified source of income, you have a much, much better chance of being stable. So if you have online coaching, then you have education, you have in-person coaching. I'm working on a supplement brand. So we have all kind of options that we can delve into when we're in this field. And I think that the more we do differently, the better we'll do. And on top of that, I think that you asked me what I was passionate about, right? My biggest flaw as a human being, okay, is that I lose interest extremely fast if I do the same thing over and over again, okay? So even though I'm well known for all the training programs I've written, I cannot for the life of me follow a program. Because after 2 weeks of doing the same shit, I'm just bored to death. but I'm the same way with coaching. I'm the same way with any other aspect in this field. So I need a variation in stimulus. So if I'm only doing in-person coaching, I will get bored. If I'm doing only education, I'll get bored. If I'm only doing online coaching, I'll get bored. And once I get bored, I get ineffective. But if I find myself doing tons of different stuff at smaller doses, it keeps my brain sharp and it keeps me interested.
I like that. And I find that I'm fulfilled and enriched by getting to do a greater variety of things. It's time consuming for sure to write. It's time consuming to prepare presentations and do the educational stuff, the travel, and the travel can be tiring, certainly in the moment. Although, a couple weeks after, like, right as soon as you land home, you're like, no more, not for 6 months minimum.
Yeah.
3 weeks later, you start thinking about your next trip. And I think that's true of like anybody who flies anywhere.
Yeah.
And then there's doing the podcast. But honestly, this stuff is fulfilling. But I also look at it as it's sort of a playground, right? It's fun. And I warn coaches against trying to think about all of this stuff that we get to do through the lens of, well, what's my ROI on this? Am I making money on this, et cetera? It's like, make your money coaching people. Okay. Make that so damned stable, solid, secure, and then draw from that experience for the ideas that go into writing articles. All of my article ideas come from either my own training or when I'm training clients.
And it shows because people will read them. And I've proofread, not proofread, but reviewed tons of articles for T Nation, like authors just sending articles. And it's like they write about stuff they've never done before. They've never applied it, but it sounds good in theory. And it's a lot more common. You have authors who will write articles just based on pictures they took because they look good on those pictures, on those videos. So they want to use them. So they write the article to go along with that. So, but it shows. I mean, if you write from experience, and especially if people know about it, that then they will trust you as a source of information. And it's just not theoretical stuff that some 18 years old who've seen Instagram for a few months can come up with. I mean, nothing beats experience.
All right. I've talked about this topic on appearances I made at other podcasts, but I don't know if I've really brought it back here, but you're a perfect person for this. So I've been thinking a lot lately about the traditional gatekeepers of the industry. So in the context of, in order for someone to become a known authority within fitness, right, an industry leader, and you are a great example of someone who's been in that position for a very long time. For a very long time, you have to be platformed or get through one of the traditional gatekeepers. And those gatekeepers are the online publishers, I mean, the in-print publications. Someone probably has to be a very high level competitive athlete, whether it's in powerlifting, strongman, IFBB pro card, et cetera, right? And you probably, like a Ben Pakulski kind of got his start probably through his IFBB, because this is not just an IFBB pro card is amazing, but this is also not just some guy who won a show and then didn't go further with it. This guy's standing on the Olympia stage multiple times, right? So that's a very big deal. And then he's getting a lot of press in Flex Magazine, Muscle and Fitness in the traditional sense. Or someone's writing for a bodybuilding.com, or they've come out of the traditional affiliate network, which is sort of an insider's club. And that's no longer the pathway you have to get through. So I use the analogy of the music industry, where if you were to break through as a known artist, you have to get signed to a record label who controls access to MTV, Much Music in our Canadian case, or the radio, right? All that stuff still goes through the record companies back in the day. And then now with YouTube, Justin Bieber gets discovered on YouTube, I think it was, or SoundCloud, however else, there's a lot more access, social media. And that's a big thing. The paradigm shift has been social media. YouTube is a type of social media. So now coaches can bypass the traditional gatekeeper if they're good at social media. And I think there's obviously pros and cons to that as well. But I get to thinking that with the rapid growth, and you said this earlier, like someone can do well on social media, algorithm changes, more people come along. There are more coaches coming along, building rapid followings quicker. So your foothold, even in social media, is tenuous at best. So now I'm thinking that one of the best ways to differentiate yourself is to actually do the classic things, like write for your T Nations, your bodybuilding.coms. And that I want to hear what you think about your experience coming through the old gatekeeper stuff and its relevance today?
Yeah.
Anything?
Well, I think that, well, first of all, how I got started, kind of a like semi-funny story, because I actually created my own website. And that's when we had like in 1997 or something like that. Anybody could have had a website for it, like with GeoCity or something like that. And I created a website with Fred Hadfield's son, so Fred Hadfield, Dr. Squat, who squatted over 1,000 pounds, his son Fred Jr., as well as Eric Hesse, who worked with, eventually would work with Muscle Tech, and Joachim Bartol, who ended up being the publisher for the Swedish version of Ironman magazine. So we started out like as 18-year-old kid. My English is bad right now, but you should have seen it back then. It literally sounded like someone who spoke Polish, who tried to translate Japanese and English. That's pretty much the accurate description. But the information was still pretty decent. Anyway, so at one point, like T Nation was coming up with Polican and all the big names were all writing for T Nation. So my dream has always been, I want to write for T Nation, because Polican was, I was a big fan of Charles and stuff like that. So I actually sent them an article. I think it was called The Other Kind of Snatch, on the power snatch, of course. And they picked that up. And it's funny because like 2 weeks later, I received a check in the mail. And I have, to this day, no idea how they got the address. Zero idea. And I kept sending articles, and they kept refusing articles because it probably wasn't what they were looking for. So I went to the website and I read every single article. I wanted to see a pattern. What was popular? What kind of article was popular? The length, the topics, the tone, and all that stuff. And one thing I do good, and that's my secret weapon, is that, and that's going to sound really, really bad, by the way, I'm a great mimicker. I can, I don't copy people, but I can mimic their behavior, their style. When I'm presenting, when I'm writing, I could actually like write like John McCollum, I could write like Polican. So I was very easily changing the tone of my writing to what they were looking for. And that might have been like intellectually dishonest, but I've seen worse in the industry. And then I kept sending articles, and they kept picking it up, and I received checks after checks. And eventually I received a call at my parents' home, because I was living with my parents. I was like 18 or 19. Again, no idea how they got my phone number. And they offered me a full-time gig, which lasted for like 27 years. So honestly, I am probably the worst person to ask for advice, because it was like, I don't want to say luck. I guess I kind of forced it because I researched what, and there's one lesson to take here, is look at what's, and for any media, either the classical one, the traditional ones, or the new ones, look at what is popular. And of course, you want your own brand. You want your own content, but there's a tone, there's a rhythm, there's a visual, there's structure that seems to be attracting people's eye, attracting Google's eye, attracting the algorithm. So if you can figure out what the model is by looking at who's successful, but then you put your own twist to it, you cover your own topics to it. And sadly, the one thing I'm to this day still pissed about, though, is that what is the most popular is polemic. It's being conflictual. It's polarization, and I'm not that guy. I can actually see good in what pretty much everybody is doing. What everybody's doing. So I'm the middle of the ground guy. So that's never going to be super popular. But if you really want instant success, write about a polarizing topic. Write about diet. I mean, I'm looking at my post. If I posted why I'm going back on a carnivore diet.
I saw that.
Yeah, I got like triple or quadruple the interactions as I get from like a super impressive, useful post on programming or whatever. Just people, okay, need to understand that, yes, some people are looking for information. And these are the people who will read articles, long form content, whether that's video, long form video or article, or for people like us, okay? These are typically not necessarily the people who will send you money. except for online courses, but they will be a very, very popular followers. So they will be interested in long form stuff. But for the short term attraction grabbing, instantly building your following, you want something that is polarizing. That's the easiest way. That's the easiest. And understand the psychology of people. People, yes, some want information, but most want to be heard. So a post that will trigger them to post their opinion is what will give you interaction. That's what I've noticed. So if you act like this is the knowledge, use that, right? You're going to get a few questions. But if you turn your post or your material, your content in a way to stimulate discussion, then you're going to get great interactions.
And I've been similar to you in that I just cannot take the bait on the highly polarizing stuff.
Okay, I can do it, and I know that's what I should do if I want like huge followers, but that's not me.
Well, there's also an equation here. And I know my answer. Do you have the emotional bandwidth to deal with the insanity that's going to come with it, the portion of negativity? I just saw today, for example, just before I logged on, there's an account that I like him. I'm not going to say names, but he's got a good moral compass. But what he'll do is he'll stitch together a bunch of like stuff that other people say that are inconsistent with his brand and his ideology. And I've seen him nuke people who I think their messaging is just trash. Like I just think their messaging is garbage. But then just before I get on here, he's got after Ed, he's put into post a friend of mine who like her messaging is like, okay, it's like not the same way I would message. And I find it's fine. I think it's just for a different audience, but he's got Ed like put her up and I've looked at some of the comments and one of his followers has said something nasty about like her appearance. And I'm just like, oh, right. And I'm just like, okay, well, first of all, I'm not going to go near this shit because, there's no point. And my second friend, the one who's being sort of called out, she won't give two shits or she'll just fire back because she's just no fucks given. Anyway, so I'm just like, I see this and I'm like, I don't want to get caught up in this stuff. I'm not interested in playing this game now. I have thought about doing video-based stuff, interact or reacting to certain things I see, but doing it with nuance and not being scathing and fire and brimstone. Outside of like the real charlatans, the grifters, but even then, I'm just not sure. Do I have the emotional stamina to deal with this stuff? I always use Lane Norton as an example, and I think Lane, generally speaking, on the average, I mean, I think he's exceptionally evidence-based. I think that he's punching at the worst people in the industry in a lot of cases. But you also can see that Lane every once in a while references just how exhausting he is. And then all over the place, I see the viciousness and the hatred and the awfulness that Lane gets from the other tribes. And I'm just like, I couldn't possibly deal with that.
Yeah, I'm looking at what like Paul Carter is going through. Paul is a friend of mine. So he doesn't have the most stellar reputation on social media because he is pretty quick to ban people. And when people disagree with him, he's kind of harsh about it. But some of his comments that he gets, it's way out there. But anyway, I personally couldn't do it. And just one thing I found funny, I'm still trying to figure that out. And I'm not going to name names because the guy is pretty well known in the industry and he's pretty successful. And it's fun. And I still don't know the answer to this day. He actually banned me from his Instagram account. Okay. And I've never spoken to him in person. I've never actually written or commented on anything he's done. I've never visited his account before that point. I've never talked shit about him. In fact, to me, even though he was very successful, to me, it was irrelevant. Like I don't care. And you made one post about Paul. I just wanted to read it, and I couldn't because I was banned from his account. An account I've never been to before, never commented on, and I never talked about that guy in my life. And I'm still trying to figure out why he blocked me. So some people are overly sensitive. Maybe he got afraid that I would actually get on his case eventually, sort of preemptive strike kind of thing. But I'm not that guy. I don't care. But I just find that funny.
I've never once witnessed you in any comment or in any way, shape, or form attack, say anything negative about anybody else. And as you said, you can take shortcuts with polarizing stuff. But I think that I genuinely try to avoid that stuff, right? I'm not flawless, but I genuinely try to avoid it. And I like to look at where I am, all the opportunities I've gotten, the bridging, building bridges, developing relationships in the industry, and it's been a net good. There are a very, very tiny minority of individuals in the industry I just have no time for, some negative interactions with. That's fine. That is probably going to happen in this space anyway. That is just it is what it is. So I don't worry about it. There's lots of people I just like just kind of pretend they aren't there. They ignore me. We just don't interact and we're fine.
But
Everybody's
one thing you mentioned, and I just popped in my head about writing on for the traditional medias, like
Mhm.
websites like that. I think that one thing that it can do is it does set you apart.
Yes.
Because first, to me, and that is going to sound bad, it kind of established intellectual superiority.
Hmm.
Just because you can actually talk about a topic in depth, write about it clearly in more than a 15-second video. So you know your shit because you need to expand on just more than a few sound bites, right? And also, as you mentioned, because very few people are doing it, it's like writing a book. When you write a book, you're in that special club. Even though books are not super popular nowadays, you're not going to sell like 100,000 copies. But the fact that you have published a book, that's an accomplishment. That's something that sets you apart.
Well, Dean Somerset was just on a couple episodes ago, and he talked about this. He's got a book with Dan Pope that they just did the photo shoots for, so it should be published in the not too distant future. But Dean was open about the fact that's something he's aspired to do. He's always valued the idea of having published a book. And I often talk about status, but I warn people, don't think in terms of status. But to be honest, it does put you in a higher tier of status within the industry. And I mean that in a positive way, right? I think just people seek status when it becomes their North Star. I think that's a negative. But it's okay to I like thinking about credibility and authority are the terms that I like. And I think that you develop incredible credibility and authority in this space. If you have a book, you look at Lee Boyce recently published his first book with Melody Schoenfeld. She's written 3 books. She's a very good friend of mine. They'll both be with us in Toronto at canfitpro. Nick Shaw will be there with us. Nick has written a book now. So you looked at Brett Bartholomew, who will not be there, but Brett's conscious coaching. I mean, I don't know if there's a better example of someone who Brett's always been doing good stuff, but vaulted into a very prominent position in the industry, highly visible due to the success of a book.
Mm-hmm.
Brett's example is probably one of the greatest. And there are lots of other people in the industry who the fact that they've written a book or multiple books puts them in that special, and I'll say it, special
The
status within
difference,
our space.
and sorry about that, there's a difference between a physical book
Mm.
and an ebook. Like, and there's a difference between publishing. Like nowadays, everybody has published an ebook, which is nothing more than an expanded article sold as a PDF. Okay, but there's a difference because I've done both. I've written PDFs that were self-published, and I've written books for big editors. And when you work with an editor, the process is so much more complicated than what most people realize. I mean, your stuff is viewed and reviewed by panel of experts. They require you to make modification changes, more precision here. So you really need to get your act together when you write for a big publisher like Lee, just like me published with Human Kinetics, Jason Brown, same thing. That's a lot of work. They are extremely demanding, but the quality is there. So again, it's like just with any certificate, for example, a certificate, a diploma can give you some credibility. But again, it depends on the quality of the institution. Same thing with the editors. I mean, the pyramid would be to me like having a book published by Human Kinetics. To me, that's like top of the pyramid. Because ever since I was young, Human Kinetics was the best publishing house for anything fitness related. I mean, all the university have their books and some stuff. And at the bottom of the pyramid, you would have self-published ebooks, which still requires some work, but it's nowhere close to the quality and validity of the working with a big publisher.
Yeah, I've got a relationship with actually he's now the outgoing acquisitions editor named Corey, and
Yeah.
Corey's been great.
And Wakely.
Yeah, Van Wyck, exactly. And Corey he'd poked around at me about my interest in writing something for them. And I'm just like, I don't have the time or the bandwidth, but I have helped him pointed in the right direction for a couple of people who I thought would be good writers for specific topics they were looking for. So it's Jason Brown. You mentioned Jason. Jason's a friend, and we'll both be speaking at Luca's event. So there's another one. So Vigor Ground Fitness and Business Summit has been officially announced. The lineup's out for that. I'm in it. Jason Brown's in it. The lineup's going to be nuts. Lee Boyce is part of it. And but Jason talked about how just much time and effort went into writing his book. And it's an arduous process. I think there are people who love it and live for it, and that's their thing. And then I think there are people who kind of go, all right, I put in the effort, one and done, I'm good. I think John Goodman is one of the ones. Like, he's going to be launching his Obvious Choice book, and he already posted up about talking about the option for the next one. And like, I think it'll be book number 12 or give or take one. Holy shit.
Now, I've written as far as like with the big publishing house, like one, I published like 6 books, but they were like, some of them were self-published, so much easier to write. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, I have another project in the works with human kinetics. I just can't get myself to work on it. I mean, the first one was like giving birth to a child. And I'm a pretty prolific writer. You know, I don't have problems creating material, but it's the whole process. It is complicated. It requires a special mindset. I could not see myself being a serial book writer. I mean, especially with coaching now, with online coaching, with education, it's not something you can just do on the side. You have to devote a period of your life to that. That's why I respect it, because people who have written a book for a serious publisher, they know how much sacrifice they made to write that book versus their other incomes or other occupations. So hats off to them. It requires some. It's not something you can just wing on the top of your head.
And writing a book is a great part of that whole conversation about gatekeepers, because yes, you can self-publish, and there are more roads to that. And I think it can be done well. There are some big books out there that have been self-published, but ultimately, getting a publisher to, get behind you on this sort of thing, it's not unlike the traditional music industry and releasing a major record. Okay, so along the way, you've been doing this. You said you started writing for Teenage, 27 years ago, right? So you've been around this space for a really long time. You've probably seen some of your contemporaries over the years fade from view, right? You've seen the emergence of a lot of people who their presence in the industry has skyrocketed. Why do you think some people fade from view?
I think I'm going to use and again, I don't like to speak ill of the dead. That's not what I'm doing here. I'm using that as an example, an illustration of what could be happening. By the way, it's funny you mentioned that, because I remember when I was like coming up, like at the beginning, like Vince, you mentioned Vince Del Monte. He was writing for bodybuilding.com. He had like this funny hat, and he was like, he was the best example of a kitsch writer. Like he could not be taken seriously, but he completely changed and became one of the most influential person in our field. That was an amazing transformation. Now, some people do the opposite. I mean, I remember, and again, I was holding a seminar doing a seminar with Poliquin a few years ago. And I remember we were sitting at break time, and we're discussing training, and he said something that really resonated with me. And that's when I felt that, you know what, he's not into it anymore. So, Chris, there's nothing new in training since 1988. Like, to me, that illustrates someone who lost his passion from learning, experimenting new stuff. And I think that people say, because, right, I mean, you have authors who gain popularity through a single system. Okay, I'm going to use, very successful, great guy. I love the guy, Jim Wender, 531. Probably the most successful series on training ever written. Okay, training. Mm-hmm. That's one idea. And he's lucky enough that it keeps his popularity from generation to generation, and it's still bringing money. But you have many of those ideas that were once seen as novel and popular, and then brought quick fame to their creators, and then disappeared. Like escalating density training by Charles Staley, for example. And we have Max OT by, I don't remember the name, but it was at one point was training Skip LaCour, Jeff Willett, like very popular training system for natural bodybuilders. And what happens is when your whole shtick is one topic, one thing, and you don't evolve, you don't try to better yourself, you don't look for new things, there's only so long that you can send the same message and stay fresh. And again, just to use the example of Poliquin, when he first came out, he was decades ahead of most strength coaches because he was the first one who would stray away from the traditional 3 sets of 10, 3 sets of 12, and would include tempo, would include special methods like cluster training, like rest pause training, like heavy partial overload, stuff like that. Things that are very common nowadays, but were very novel back then. The problem is that a few years later is these ideas, in part because of his success, became so popular that they were not novel anymore, but he just kept on selling the same material. The courses did not change. A friend of mine is still teaching Charles's material, and it's the same course as when he was teaching it 20 years ago.
And I guess it's hard to own it as a brand as well. So there's someone I've been thinking of, and I never say his name, but I will out here because I'm going to be charitable in context. And I get a great kick out of Joel Seedman, right? Yeah. So anybody listening, there are going to be some people who are literally just going to laugh, but let's be charitable.
I like Joel as a person.
I've had minimal interaction with him. He seems like a nice guy. So like Joel's fine. Joel is a good example of someone who has picked an idea, this whole like 90-degree joint angle thing, right? And personally, I will explicitly say I think it's rubbish. I think it's based on like just an old bullshit study but he has doubled down on this at infinitum. And then if you go watch his social media, it's the most elaborate. And I mean, a lot of this stuff is not practical at all. It just isn't. Like, and this is not meant as a criticism, but Joel is actually quite I don't know if the word's clear, but he's open about the fact that what he's doing is it's for eyeballs, it's attention. You know, he is working with high-level athletes. That's another sort of thing. It's a complex conversation. But he's just creating new variations of this on this simple principle. And if you look at, he'll do like a slide of 10 things, and some of it you're just looking at it's circus batshittery. It just straight up is, right? But he knows what he's doing. That's the thing. Joel knows what the fuck he's doing. And he won't fight with anybody. And people like make fun of him all the time. And he won't fight with anybody. He just says, go read my book. Go read my book. Go read my book. But guess what? He's got lots of followers. People are doing his shit. And he actually has somehow fundamentally kept, like, I guess he's really got two main ideas. He's got this eccentric isometrics thing, which that's not a thing. What he's doing is he's doing
pause lifting. It's so eccentric in a pause.
Yeah, exactly. That's what he's doing, right? But he's branded as eccentric isometrics. And they're two different types of muscle contraction, but he's branded around it. You know, we can have some fun with that if we care to, but not the point. But he's got that, and he's got his 90-degree joint angle thing. And he's taken these two things. Now, no one else has really grabbed onto them because I think there's not really a solid foundation of them, but he's worked so hard at branding around it that he's created a thing. He's got people buying into it. And here's the other side of it. What is he doing? He's working with heavy loads. He's got people putting a lot of tension on muscle. If they're being consistent with these methodologies, is this stuff going to work? Well, sure it is. Like all of the argument, this is the funny thing. You get people talk about like all this like single arm cable shit now, all this biomechanics stuff or what have you. And then I find it funny when people make fun of like old school bodybuilders. Just now we're seeing these videos. I love these things where it's like, oh, you know, bodybuilding in the 80s and 90s. Yeah. And there's like, you got Ronnie and Jay Cutler doing like these heavy laterals with like a little bit of momentum. And now it's like, now it's just like this rinky-dink cable thing to some different music. But the old school guys, even if there were some flaws in the technique, what are the old school guys doing? They're putting a tremendous amount of tension on muscle. They're training like maniacs, right? We're also seeing some survivorship bias because we're not necessarily seeing the guys who, you know, broke down, got too injured outside of Bryce Warren, who just kept getting hurt coming back. We're dealing with lots of drugs. We're dealing with, you know, the elite of the elite when it comes to genetics. So we're, you know, the people who were in that position, like a Mike Metzer, a Dorian Yates, you know, and you get these different philosophies about high volume versus low volume. Well, across the board, we're getting tons of mechanical tension. We just are. You're getting genetic freaks in here. You're getting, sure, the drugs. But the common underlying things are actually what's making people grow. They keep showing up in the gym, they keep training hard, and they're fueling it. They're eating to grow. And the bodybuilding world, they're also really good at getting really big, but also getting really shredded for show, right? And we can argue about all this minutia or the different ways, but if you're putting a lot of tension on muscle consistently over time, if you're fueling it, if you're actually walking that balance where you're recovering from it, guess what? Within your genetics, you're going to actually see some pretty great results, no matter your methodology. And you can do some sketchy methodologies if you've got the underpinnings of good mechanical tension, good, volume of training and good consistency, and you'll still do great.
Yeah, I think that, and one thing I've noticed with the biggest difference to me, it's not necessarily like, because I saw the video you mentioned, like you have Jay and Ronnie doing very heavy laterals, slightly cheated, then you have a super mega strict single arm lateral raise. Yep. I think that the biggest issue with the modern trainees is that they are sciencing their way out of hard work.
I like that.
Like they figure out I'm focusing on precision, on getting all okay, and I have to do exactly 9.3 sets on average per week. It needs to be done at the fullest range of motion possible. You need to maintain tension. You need that exact joint angle. And people forget that, you know what? The two main important things that will make you grow. The reason why people are not progressing is simply they're not training hard enough and they don't have that inner drive to progress. I mean, progressive overload is, sure, it sounds not sexy because it's something that was done like 50 years ago, but it's still how it works. As long as, of course, people need to understand that progressive overload is not just adding weight to the bar or adding reps. It needs to be done under the same conditions. I mean, if you're cheating to get more weight up, to me, that's not progressive overload. But again, proper form to put mechanical tension on the proper muscle, right level of effort. Yeah, and that's something I'm going to put two studies in context. The first study looked at a group of individuals were trained, and they gave them a list of exercises. They said, well, here's 10 exercises. How much weight would you use in your workout for a hard set of 10 reps? So they would write down the weight, and then they would go to the gym with them and train them with the weight they selected, but they would push them to failure. And they all did 6 to 9 reps more than the 10 they were supposed to do. Okay, first study. Second study, they looked at training 4 reps short of failure. And even with 32 sets per muscle per week, there was minimal to no hypertrophy gains. So what if most people train leaving 6 reps in reserve? People just don't push hard enough. So I'm pretty sure that Jay Cutler, Ronnie Coleman, and all those guys who might have seen like they were training like barbarian with no knowledge about training or whatever, or biomechanics, well, they sure train hard. And they left no more than 1 rep in the tank, maybe 2 sometimes, but they train hard. But then again, it's weird because you have the opposite. You have people who, okay, I need to train hard, so they take everything to failure and beyond, and now they can't recover. So that's the art of training. You need to learn to push yourself hard, but not so hard that you can't do more effective sets or that you can't recover. But I think that the biggest problem for like those who would, and I have nothing against like single arm lateral pull down with a pulley. I mean, if you have a weak lat, I do believe that unilateral work is better than bilateral work because you can better focus on the muscle. And that has its place in the program, but not at the expense of foregoing effort level. Most people, they're just not training hard enough. And they think just because I'm using what is biomechanically the best exercise or the best number of sets or reps in theory, it's going to work. No, it's not. I mean, the most basic program done at 100% will give you better results than the best program ever designed done at 80%.
And I think you hit on it there. I think it's finding that sweet spot. And it comes with experience, it comes with practice of training hard enough that you're getting within that. Because the research seems to point to getting within about 5 reps of failure. That's what the research seems to say. But what do we know? If we tell someone 5 reps, because as you illustrated, they're not really good at knowing exactly, then they don't meet the threshold. So what do we always tell people? aim for within 1 to 2 reps of failure. What does that tell you? One is most people are probably going to get under that 5 threshold if they have some practice. And two, you're saying 1 to 2, it means that we're not always smashing against the wall of failure and a lot of post-failure training. I built a lot of muscle over the years and I gained a lot of muscle fairly quickly. I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'2", and so I put a lot of muscle on the frame. I went from 170 to 210. And at that juncture, I mean, there's no any extra pharmaceutical shit in the equation. And I was 24 years old when I got really serious about this. And what did I do? I did a lot of classic bodybuilding stuff. I trained 4 to 5 times a week, body part splitting, which you're not supposed to do, but actually, if you're doing enough volume, it fucking works amazing. I was doing classic bodybuilding style exercises, full body compounds, a lot of free weights, some machine based stuff. I was pyramiding my sets up, so I was warming up through, which I always thought, and it's been very validated by the research that that's a really effective way to warm up for training. You don't need half an hour
I've
of
always done that.
Yep.
Even as a weightlifter, as just quick story about that.
Sure.
I was writing like programs for T Nation, and I would write something like, let's say, 5 sets of 5, and then Tim would call me up, Tim Patterson, and he said, "Well, people can't do that; they're gonna burn out." Well, just that's because you need to gradually add weight to your set. I mean, you don't go all out from the first set. Like at each set, you pyramid the weight up. Mm-hmm. You work your way up. Either you change your rep or you keep your set, but you might have the last 2 sets that are heavy. And that's people. People don't know how to read programs. They see like 10 sets, 6 sets of 6. They think it's 6 sets of failure, dude. You can't survive that.
No, and exactly. So what was probably happening was probably ending up with 1 to 2 sets at the top of the pyramid, which were pretty close to failure. And there were probably like 2 exercises across the whole workout. Was probably doing a drop set for past failure, high intensity, high mechanical tension stuff. And also, if you do this kind of intensity, you also train your stamina to be able to do more of this kind of intensity. You both physically and mentally tolerate the intensity of the training. And then what are you doing? You're training hard. Then you go eat, right? And I wasn't counting macros back at the time. I was just eating, right? You make sure you have high protein meals. And I don't believe that everybody can auto-regulate this stuff to precision. But I think that if you do this sort of thing, you train hard, you learn from your experience, you see how you feel, and you apply this consistently over time, you generally get really good results from the process. And I agree with you. I think a deep understanding of this stuff is great. But when we're coaching our clients, do we overcomplicate the process with explaining all this elaborate shit with them? Unless we're that coach that's still in that phase where you need to show off to your client how much you fucking know. You got to get over that shit, guys.
And that's something that that I remember that I noticed ever since I came back to coaching, that I was reminded of it, is that when you're training 90% of our clients, you don't need super advanced knowledge on anything anyway. So I tend to write articles in that aspect. And also what you mentioned earlier, about what an interesting point is that, like, doing those drop sets and stuff like that train you to tolerate better volume. And I think that is one of the missing component of the effort-based training trend. Like, keep it super low volume and train to failure. The problem is you never train your body to recover. I mean, anybody who has worked with athletes know that when you do extensive work, the body's recovery capacity, once it's adapting, it can recover from more work. That's how it works. That's another work in 2 sentences. But doing phases or increased volume will not only allow you to better perform in your workouts if you decrease volume, because now you have more energy, but you recover faster from workout to workout because you improve your work capacity. And again, that's what I learned from coaching athletes. That's the limitation of, that's the one thing I don't like about, like, the bodybuilding purists. Their only base of knowledge is bodybuilding. They don't look outside of it for clues about what could be added to their program. And I think better conditioning is something that you should take from athletes. And I'm not just talking about doing lifting volume, but doing cardio conditioning, anaerobic conditioning, aerobic conditioning, all that stuff trains your body to recover. Sure, at first it's a recovery cost, but eventually it gets your body in better shape by improving cardiovascular system, vascular system, and many other parameters that allow you to, tolerate more volume And if you can tolerate more volume, you can grow more from volume. You're not going to trash your nervous system as much. People on the effort-based spectrum, which I respect, they tend to talk about central fatigue quite a bit. And that's the argument they use for taking longer rest period. That's the argument they use for doing less volume, because each set you create some central fatigue. Central fatigue is a weakening of the central drive to the muscles. When the drive is weaker, you cannot recruit a big motor unit, so you cannot build as much muscle. But here's the thing, that can be trained. That can be trained. I mean, that's sure, machines are just as effective on the spot to build muscle than free weights. But a big squat, a big deadlift, by being more neurologically challenging, actually leads to adaptation in the nervous system that strengthen that drive. So if you increase the efficacy of the nervous system or the synapses to respond better to the neural drive, you are not as affected by central fatigue. So by doing big basic lifts, even though they might not be biomechanically optimal because I'm not stable when lifting or whatever, you know what? You're implanting, you're investing in future gains by improving the nervous system. So when you're doing your most effective work in the future, you have more drive to go on. So even if you lose 50% of your drive because of central fatigue, you still have plenty to recruit the fast twitch fibers, and then you can do more volume.
And evidence of that is, you know, a lot of high level athletes. Think about MMA fighters. Think about any sport, like pro North American team sports, like God, NBA, hockey are really good examples of, certainly football, where you need to be able to, over the course of a game, repeatedly come out with very, very high force, high velocity movement patterns. And you have to train the ability to do that. Joel Jameson stuff is some of the best out there. Joel's been a guest of mine a number of times and is a friend. So anybody listening who's interested in that stuff, I would dig into Joel's work. His course, certified conditioning coach. I've done it. I love it. He's got great stuff. Christian, where can people find you to dig into more of your stuff?
You can go on Thibaudeau.com, which is my website, or Thibaudeau on Instagram. That's mostly it. By the way, just one example you mentioned about repeating. Sure. And that's one that I was training a football player. He played in the CFL, football lineman, bench press 520. And at the end of the preparation period of season, I wanted to train the capacity to repeat a high level of effort with very short rest periods, because he has like 45 seconds between plays, or 35 depending on the league. So at first we would use 80% on the bar, and our goal was to do 80% for 5 reps for 5 sets. Okay. And the first time with 45 seconds of rest, the first time he did it, we had to do like 420, 365, 315, 275, 225, seemingly proving the central fatigue theory. Here's the thing. After 4 weeks of this, he was doing 425 across for all 5 sets with 30 seconds of rest. I've had a CrossFit girl beat her PR on snatch right after a 400-meter sprint. I mean, these examples prove that with adaptations, you can train your nervous system to recover faster or have a stronger drive, which will not lead to decrease in performance even when you're fatigued.
And I think this stuff's underrated. I don't think a lot of people are even talking about this training quality. So for all the coaches listening, you know, guys, dive into Christian's stuff. So tibarmy.com, and go follow on Instagram. And for anybody who can make either Toronto or my event in Edmonton, if you're interested in more details, message me. I'll send you the website links. Come hang out with us. We will, you'll get to see us present on a bunch of stuff. And I can't wait to actually finally hang out in person, Christian.
And bring donuts.
Donuts. Bring donuts to them.
Or donuts.
All right. We'll have to remember that for my event. All right. Everybody listening, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate this. I'm going to try to get you guys more great guests, more great episodes across the year. I can't commit to weekly like I used to try, but I'm going to do my best to keep serving this to you. Share this with someone in your world that you think will really benefit from it. This is how I reach and help more people. And guys, again, thank you.